The scent of ground wheat filled Martha Mee's nostrils as she watched old Thomas Wright measure out the last of her cornmeal. His weathered hands steady despite his 70 years, and she wondered how much longer she could accept his charity without feeling the weight of shame crush her completely. The mill wheel outside churned steadily, its familiar rhythm a backdrop to the quiet transaction happening inside the dim interior of Wright's mill on the edge of Calico, California, where the Mojave Desert met what remained of civilization in this year of 1885. Martha had been coming here every month since her father died 2 years ago, leaving her nothing but a small parcel of land and debts that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Thomas never asked for payment when she brought her grain. The first time she had come after the funeral, coins clutched in her sweating palm, he had waved her money away with a gruff kindness that made her throat tight. Every month since, the same silent ritual played out. She would arrive with her sacks, he would grind them, and she would leave without paying a cent. It kept her alive, but it also kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her father's cabin, cataloging all the ways she was failing to stand on her own. "Same time next month, Miss Martha?" Thomas asked, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Yes, sir," she replied, her own voice barely above a whisper. "And I promise, as soon as I sell the fall harvest, stop that talk," he interrupted, but not unkindly. "Your daddy was a good man. Helped me fix my roof the year the monsoons came." "This is what neighbors do." Martha nodded, swallowing hard against the gratitude and humiliation warring in her chest. She was 22 years old enough that the townspeople had started calling her a spinster behind their fans and over their fence posts. Old enough that she should be managing better than this. She hefted the sack of cornmeal, feeling the familiar strain in her shoulders, and turned to leave. The late afternoon sun hit her full in the face as she stepped outside, momentarily blinding her. When her vision cleared, she noticed a man standing near the hitching post, tall and lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle. His hat was pushed back just enough that she could see dark hair and a strong jawline, and he was watching the mill with an expression she could not quite read. Martha ducked her head and hurried past him toward her wagon, a rickety thing that had belonged to her father and protested every journey with creaks and groans. She had just loaded her sack when she heard boots on the packed earth behind her. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deep, with a rough edge that spoke of years under the sun and wind. Martha turned slowly, clutching her shawl despite the heat. Up close, the man was younger than she had first thought, maybe 26 or 27, with eyes the color of creek water after a storm, greenish-gray and direct. His clothes were dusty from the trail but well made, and the gun on his hip looked well maintained but not ostentatious. "Yes," she managed. "I couldn't help but notice you didn't pay the miller." His words were blunt, and Martha felt her face flame with embarrassment and anger. "I am not in the habit of discussing my business with strangers," she said, lifting her chin even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "No offense meant," he said quickly, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. "Name is Jacob Tate. I just rode in from Nevada, looking to settle somewhere permanent. Been ranching up north, but the winters are harsh and I am ready for somewhere I can put down real roots." Martha stared at him, unsure what his life story had to do with her humiliation. "That is very interesting, Mr. Tate, but I have to be going." "Wait," he said, and something in his tone made her pause. "I was thinking if the miller ground your grain for free, he must be a charitable man. Or maybe you have an arrangement. Either way, it seems to me that a man running a business ought to be paid for his work, and a woman ought to have her pride intact." The blood roared in Martha's ears. "My pride is none of your concern." "You are right," Jacob said, and to her surprise he looked genuinely abashed. "I am saying this all wrong. What I mean is, I would like to do business with the miller, but I would also like to help you if you would let me. Not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "An investment, maybe, or call it a loan if that sits better with you." "I do not know you," Martha said, her voice shaking now, "and I do not take money from strange men." "Fair enough," Jacob said. He took a step back, giving her space. "But maybe you would let me buy you dinner at the hotel restaurant. Just to talk, nothing more. I am new in town and do not know a soul. You would be doing me a favor." Martha wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to climb into her wagon and leave this presumptuous stranger in the dust. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not pity, which she would have hated, but a kind of earnest hopefulness that seemed almost boyish despite his obvious years. "Just dinner," she heard herself say, "and you will not mention my business again." "Not a word," Jacob promised. 6 o'clock at the Calico Hotel. Martha nodded stiffly, then climbed into her wagon before she could change her mind. As she drove away, she glanced back once and saw Jacob walking toward the mill, his stride purposeful. Despite herself, she wondered what he was going to say to Thomas Wright. The Calico Hotel was the finest building in town, which was not saying much given that most of Calico consisted of wooden structures that had been thrown up during the silver boom and left to bake under the desert sun. Still, the hotel had real glass windows and a dining room with tablecloths, and Martha felt distinctly out of place as she entered at precisely 6 o'clock wearing her best dress, a green cotton thing that had been her mother's and was now faded and old-fashioned. Jacob was already waiting, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. He stood when he saw her, and Martha noticed several women in the dining room turn to look, their expressions speculative. Small-town gossip moved faster than a telegraph, and she knew that by morning everyone would know she had dined with the handsome stranger. "Thank you for coming," Jacob said as he held out her chair. His manners were good, she noticed. Someone had raised him properly. They ordered beef and potatoes, and for a few minutes they ate in awkward silence. Martha kept her eyes on her plate, hyper-aware of the whispers around them. Finally, Jacob cleared his throat. "I went back to the mill," he said. Martha's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "I asked Mr. Wright what his usual price was for grinding grain. Then I paid him double for the next 6 months of your milling, in advance." Martha set down her fork carefully, afraid she might throw it otherwise. "You did what?" "I paid him for your milling," Jacob repeated, meeting her gaze steadily. "And before you get angry, let me explain. I also bought a piece of land just outside town, the old Reynolds place. It has been empty for 3 years, but the house is sound and there is good grazing. I am going to need help getting it running, and I was thinking you might know the area, know the people. So really, I am paying you in advance for your advice and assistance." "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," Martha said, but her voice lacked heat. She was too shocked to muster real anger. "Is it?" Jacob leaned forward, his eyes intent. "Martha, I saw your face when you left that mill. I saw what it cost you to accept that charity, and I have been where you are. After my folks died, I spent 2 years barely scraping by, taking handouts and hating myself for it. Finally, a rancher gave me a job and a chance, and it changed everything. I am not trying to insult you. I am trying to give you the same chance someone gave me." Martha stared at him, her mind reeling. "You do not even know me." "Then let me get to know you," Jacob said simply. "Have dinner with me again tomorrow. Show me around Calico. Tell me which merchants are honest and which will cheat me. Help me figure out how to make that ranch work. In exchange, your milling is paid for half a year, and maybe by then you will have had a good harvest and can pay your own way. No shame in that." "Why?" Martha whispered. Why would you do this for a stranger? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, turning his water glass between his hands. When I first saw you at the mill, you had your head up and your shoulders back, even though I could see you were carrying something heavy, not just the grain sack. And when I said what I said, you did not cry or make excuses. You got angry. You have pride and strength, and those are qualities I admire. Also, he added with a small smile, you are the prettiest woman I have seen in 3 states, but I figured leading with that might get me slapped. Despite everything, Martha felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. It came out more like a sob, and then she was crying in the middle of the dining room, tears streaming down her face while Jacob looked panicked and thrust his napkin at her. I am sorry, he said desperately. Please do not cry. I am a fool. I should not have said anything. I will go tell Mr. Wright to return the money. No, Martha gasped, wiping her eyes. No, I am not sad. I have been holding it together for so long, and you come in like a tornado and say these things, and I do not know what to do with it all. She took a shaky breath and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His face was open and worried, and there was no guile in his expression that she could see. He was just a man trying to do a good thing, however clumsily. Okay, she said finally. Okay, I will help you with the ranch. But you have to understand something, Jacob Tate. I will not be a charity case and I will not be bought. If we do this, it is a business arrangement, nothing more. You pay me fair wages for my work, just like you would pay any ranch hand. Deal, Jacob said immediately, relief washing over his features. Fair wages, business arrangement. Although I reserve the right to also take you to dinner if you will let me, because that has nothing to do with business and everything to do with wanting to spend time with you. Martha felt her cheeks heat, but she nodded. I suppose that would be acceptable. They finished their meal talking about the ranch, about Calico and its people, about the weather and water rights and all the practical matters of desert living. Martha found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Jacob listened when she talked, asked intelligent questions, and did not dismiss her opinions even though she was a woman. By the time he walked her out to her wagon in the cooling evening air, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Same time tomorrow, Jacob asked as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. Tomorrow is Sunday, Martha reminded him. There is a church service in the morning if you are inclined. Then I will see you at church, Jacob said. He stepped back and tipped his hat to her, and Martha drove away feeling like the world had tilted on its axis and righted itself in a completely new configuration. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot, as most mornings did in the Mojave. Martha dressed carefully in her second-best dress and pinned up her dark hair, trying not to think too hard about why she was taking extra care with her appearance. Church was held in the schoolhouse, the only building in Calico large enough to hold most of the town's 400 residents. And by the time Martha arrived, the benches were already filling up. She saw Jacob immediately. He was standing near the back, looking slightly uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, and his face lit up when he spotted her. Several heads turned to follow his gaze, and Martha heard the whispers start up again. Let them talk, she thought with a defiance that surprised her. She had done nothing wrong. Jacob made his way through the crowd to her side. Morning, he said, his voice warm. You look lovely. Thank you, Martha replied, trying to ignore the way her heart skipped. Come on, we should find seats before Reverend Stone starts. They ended up squeezed into a bench near the middle, shoulders pressed together in the crowd. The service was the usual mix of hymns and scripture, but Martha barely heard a word of it. She was too aware of Jacob beside her, the way his voice rumbled through the hymns, the way he smelled of soap and leather. When she dared to glance at him from the corner of her eye, She found him looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. After the service, they were immediately surrounded by curious townspeople. Everyone wanted to meet the newcomer, and Jacob bore the scrutiny with good grace, shaking hands and answering questions about where he had come from and what his plans were. More than once, Martha caught women her age eyeing him speculatively, and she was surprised by the spike of something hot and unpleasant in her chest. Jealousy, she realized with dismay. She had no claim on this man, and yet the thought of him courting someone else made her want to do something violent. "Walk with me," Jacob murmured in her ear when they finally escaped the crowd. "I would like to see this town of yours." They walked through Calico's dusty streets, Martha pointing out landmarks and Jacob listening attentively. The silver mines that had built the town were mostly played out now, but enough ore remained to keep things going, and the railroad stop meant supplies flowed through regularly. It was not a bad place to live, Martha thought, seeing it through Jacob's eyes. Hard, yes, but what place in the West was not? They ended up at the edge of town where the desert stretched out in all directions, broken only by the occasional Joshua tree and the purple smudge of mountains on the horizon. The wind blew hot and constant, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. "Tell me about your father," Jacob said quietly. They were sitting on a low stone wall, ostensibly resting but really just enjoying the relative privacy. Martha was quiet for a long moment. "He was a good man," she finally said. "Worked himself to death trying to make that land produce. It is not good farmland, too dry, but he was stubborn. Kept thinking next year would be better. Next year it would rain more. Next year the crops would not fail." She swallowed hard. "He died 2 winters ago. His heart just gave out one morning. I found him in the barn." Jacob's hand found hers, his fingers warm and calloused. "I am sorry." "The debts came after," Martha continued, grateful for the solid presence beside her. "Turns out he had borrowed money to buy seed and equipment. I sold almost everything to pay it back, kept only what I needed to survive. Thomas Wright knew my father, knew me since I was a child. He started grinding my grain for free without me even asking. I tried to pay, but he would not take it." "He is a good man," Jacob said. "He is," Martha agreed. "But every time I took his charity, I felt like I was failing. Like I was proving right all the people who said a woman could not manage alone." "You are not failing," Jacob said fiercely. "You are surviving. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it, Martha. The shame is in refusing to help when you can." Martha turned to look at him, really look at him. His face was earnest and open, and something in her chest loosened, a knot she had been carrying for 2 years finally beginning to unravel. "Why are you really here, Jacob?" she asked softly. "In Calico, I mean. There are easier places to ranch than the Mojave Desert." Jacob was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I was engaged once. Girl I grew up with back in Nevada. We were going to get married, have a dozen kids, run a ranch together. Then she met a banker from San Francisco and decided she wanted city life instead. Cannot blame her really. What I could offer was hard work and uncertainty. He could offer her comfort and stability." "I am sorry," Martha said, and meant it. Jacob shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "It was 2 years ago. I thought I was over it, but every time I rode past the places we used to go, I felt it all over again. Finally decided I needed a fresh start somewhere no one knew me or my history. Somewhere I could build something new." "And you ended up in Calico," Martha said with a slight smile. "And I ended up in Calico," Jacob agreed, smiling back. "Funny how things work out. I come here looking to forget the past and walk right into my future." The weight of his gaze made Martha's stomach flutter. "You do not know that," she said, but her voice was breathless. "Do not I?" Jacob shifted closer, his hand still holding hers. "Martha, I know we just met. I know this is fast and probably crazy. But I have learned life is too short to waste time pretending. I like you, more than like you, and unless I am completely misreading things, you feel something too." Martha's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I do," she admitted. "But Jacob, you do not really know me. What if you are just drawn to me because I am a project? Something to fix?" "You are not broken," Jacob said firmly. "And you are not a project. You are a strong, beautiful woman who has been carrying the world on her shoulders. I want to help carry it with you if you will let me. Not because you need saving, but because that is what people do when they care about each other." "What if it does not work?" Martha whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if you change your mind?" "What if I do not?" Jacob countered. "What if this is it, Martha? What if you are the reason I ended up in this dusty town in the middle of nowhere? What if we are supposed to build that new life together?" Martha felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were different tears. Hope and fear and longing all mixed together. "This is crazy," she said. "Probably," Jacob agreed, "but the best things usually are." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let me court you properly, Martha, me. Let me prove I am serious. And if at any point you want me to back off, just say the word and I will respect that. But give me a chance. Give us a chance." Martha thought about the long, lonely years ahead if she said no. Thought about growing old alone in her father's cabin, accepting charity until the day she died. Then she thought about what it might be like to have a partner, someone to share the burdens and the joys. Someone who looked at her the way Jacob was looking at her right now, like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "Okay," she said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Court me. But we do this right, Jacob, slow and proper. I will not have people saying I am desperate or that you took advantage." "Slow and proper," Jacob promised, though his grin suggested he was thrilled with even that small concession. "I can do that. Though you should know I am planning to marry you eventually. Might take 6 months, might take a year, but I am going to ask. Fair warning." Martha laughed, surprised by the sound. When had she last laughed like that, free and genuine? "You are awfully confident for a man I met yesterday." "Just stating my intentions," Jacob said, standing and pulling her up with him. "Now, how about you show me this land of yours? I want to see what we are working with." The ride out to Martha's property took about 30 minutes by wagon. Jacob had rented a horse from the livery and rode alongside her, both of them sweating under the relentless sun. The land, when they reached it, was not impressive. 15 acres of scrub and sand, with a small cabin that badly needed repairs and a barn that leaned at a concerning angle. "It is not much," Martha said, trying to see it through his eyes and feeling inadequate all over again. "It has potential," Jacob said, and he sounded like he meant it. He swung down from his horse and walked the property with Martha trailing behind, pointing out the spots where her father had tried to plant crops, the dry wash that sometimes flooded during summer storms, the well that had been dug but never produced much water. "The problem is irrigation," Jacob said, standing with his hands on his hips and surveying the land. "You are trying to farm, but this is grazing land. Cattle, maybe goats, something that can handle the conditions. And you need access to more water." "I do not have money for cattle," Martha pointed out. "No, but I do," Jacob said. He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "What if we combined our operations? Your land borders the Reynolds place or near enough. Together, we would have enough acreage to make a real go of it. I bring the capital and the ranching experience. You bring local knowledge and," he paused, "partial ownership. We split everything 50-50. Martha stared at him. "That is insane. You would be giving me half of everything you have worked for. I would be gaining a partner, Jacob corrected, and making both our properties more valuable in the process. Plus, if we are going to get married eventually anyway, might as well start building our future now. You are impossible, Martha said, but she was smiling. What if I say no to marrying you when you ask? Then we dissolve the partnership and divide the assets, Jacob said with a shrug. Though I am going to make sure you do not want to say no. Fair warning on that too. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the combined properties, Jacob pointing out where they could dig better wells, where the grazing would be best, how they could use the barn on Martha's place for storage once they shored it up. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Martha found herself getting excited despite her natural caution. Maybe this could work. Maybe she had finally caught a lucky break. The sun was setting by the time they made it back to town, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Jacob helped Martha down from her wagon outside her cabin, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," he said softly, "for trusting me enough to show me your land to listen to my ideas. Thank you for seeing possibility where I only saw failure," Martha replied. She was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to sway forward into his arms. "Can I see you tomorrow?" Jacob asked. "We should draw up papers for the partnership, make it all legal and proper." "Tomorrow," Martha agreed. "Come for breakfast. I will make something decent for once instead of just cornmeal mush." Jacob's face lit up. "Breakfast sounds perfect. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, Martha confirmed. She stood on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, then hurried inside before she could see his reaction, her heart pounding and her face burning. Inside, she leaned against the closed door and tried to catch her breath. Everything was happening so fast, but for the first time in years, she was not afraid. She was excited. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Jacob was true to his word about courting her properly. He took her to dinner 3 times, always in public where everything was respectable. He attended church with her every Sunday and endured the scrutiny of the entire town with good humor. He brought her flowers he found growing wild in the desert, tough little blooms that survived against all odds, and told her they reminded him of her. But they also worked together, and that was where Martha really got to know him. Jacob hired a lawyer from Barstow to draw up partnership papers that gave Martha equal ownership of their combined ranching operation. He insisted she read every word and understand every clause before signing. They hired men to repair Martha's barn and dig a new well on the Reynolds property. Jacob bought a starter herd of cattle and 3 horses, including a gentle mare he said was for Martha. "Every rancher needs a good horse," he told her when she protested the expense. "And Daisy here is as steady as they come. She will take care of you." Martha named the mare Daisy and spent an hour every evening riding the property lines, getting to know every inch of what was now partly hers. The work was hard, but it was good. For the first time since her father died, Martha felt like she was building something instead of just surviving. The town's opinion of their arrangement was mixed. Some people approved, seeing it as a smart business decision. Others whispered that Martha had trapped the handsome newcomer, that she was using her feminine wiles to secure a husband and a fortune. Martha tried not to care what they said, but it stung nonetheless. "Let them talk," Jacob said when she mentioned it one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the Reynolds house, which was slowly becoming habitable again. "They are just jealous because we have something real." "Do we?" Martha asked, voicing the insecurity that sometimes crept up on her in the quiet moments. "Jacob, this has all happened so fast. What if we are making a mistake?" Jacob set down the piece of tack he had been mending and turned to face her fully. The setting sun cast his face in shadow, but his eyes were intense and serious. "Martha, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. These past 2 weeks with you have been the best I can remember. Waking up knowing I get to see you, working alongside you, learning how your mind works, the way you laugh when you think no one is listening, how you are patient with the animals and fierce when defending what is yours. I am falling in love with you. Actually, I am pretty sure I am already there." Martha's breath caught in her throat. They had not spoken of love yet, both of them dancing around the word like it might break the spell if said aloud. But here it was, out in the open, stark and true. "I am scared," she whispered. "What if I cannot be what you need? What if I am too broken from everything I have been through?" Jacob slid off his chair and knelt in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "You listen to me, Martha, me. You are not broken. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. And you do not have to be anything other than who you are. That is who I am falling for." The woman who held her head high even when accepting charity burned her pride. The woman who read every line of those partnership papers 3 times to make sure she understood. The woman who talks to the cattle like they are her children and cries when she thinks no one can see because she misses her father. That is who you are, and that is who I want. Tears were streaming down Martha's face now, but she did not try to hide them. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "It terrifies me, but I am." Jacob reached up and cupped her face, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Then let's be terrified together," he said, and kissed her. It was Martha's first real kiss, and it was everything and nothing like she had imagined. Soft and sweet and searching, Jacob's lips gentle against hers like he was afraid she might break. Martha kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and love into it, and felt him smile against her mouth. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "I know it is too soon. I know I promised to court you properly, but I cannot help it. I want to marry you, Martha. I want to build this ranch with you and grow old with you and have babies with you if you want them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Will you marry me?" Martha's heart was so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." Jacob let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Martha felt heat bloom low in her belly. "We should tell people," Jacob said when they finally came up for air. "Make it official. I want everyone to know you are going to be my wife." "Let's wait until after we talk to Reverend Stone," Martha said practically, even though part of her wanted to shout it from the rooftops. "Make sure he can perform the ceremony, then we can tell people." "When?" Jacob asked. "When do you want to get married?" Martha thought about it. A big wedding would take months to plan and more money than they should spend. But she did not want to wait months. She wanted to start her life with Jacob now, while everything still felt magical and possible. "A month," she said decisively. "That gives us time to make arrangements, but is not so long that I lose my nerve." "You are not going to lose your nerve," Jacob said confidently. "But a month sounds perfect, and Martha, I am going to make you so happy, I promise you that." "I know," Martha said, and realized she meant it. For the first time in her life, she was sure of her future. It would not be easy. Life in the desert never was, but it would be good. They would make it good together. The next month was a whirlwind of preparation. Reverend Stone agreed to perform the ceremony, looking pleased that his newest parishioner was settling down so quickly. Martha sewed herself a new dress with fabric Jacob insisted on buying, pale blue cotton that made her eyes look bright and clear. They decided to have the wedding at the ranch, outdoors under the desert sky, with just close friends and a few townspeople as witnesses. Thomas Wright cried when Martha told him, pulling her into a hug and telling her how proud her father would have been. "That boy is good people," he said gruffly. "Treats you right. And that business with paying for your milling, that showed character." "It did," Martha agreed, smiling through her own tears. "He is a good man, Thomas, the best I have ever known." The women of Calico, even those who had gossiped about Martha's quick engagement, rallied to help with the wedding preparations. They brought food for the reception, helped decorate the ranch house with wildflowers and ribbons, and offered advice both wanted and unwanted about marriage. Martha bore it all with as much grace as she could muster, touched despite herself by their efforts. Jacob spent the month working like a man possessed, determined to have the ranch in perfect condition before they wed. He fixed the porch, painted the house, and got the new well producing good, clean water. He bought furniture for the bedroom they would share, blushing as he told Martha he wanted everything to be nice for her. "You are going to spoil me," Martha teased, running her hand over the beautiful wooden headboard he had commissioned from the town's carpenter. "That is the plan," Jacob said, catching her hand and pulling her close. They had done a lot of kissing in the past month, stolen moments when they were supposed to be working, and Martha had discovered she was quite fond of it. "I want to give you everything, Martha, everything you have ever wanted or needed." "I just want you," Martha said honestly. "Everything else is just details." The wedding day dawned clear and hot, as was typical for September in the Mojave. Martha woke early in her father's cabin for the last time, feeling a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. This chapter of her life was ending. A new one was beginning. Her neighbor, an older woman named Helen, came to help her dress and do her hair. "You look beautiful," Helen said, pinning wildflowers into Martha's dark curls. "That young man of yours is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Martha laughed nervously, smoothing down her new dress for the 100th time. "I cannot believe this is really happening." "Believe it," Helen said warmly. "You deserve this happiness, Martha. You have earned it 10 times over." The ceremony was held at sunset when the worst heat of the day had passed. Chairs had been set up in front of the house, and about 30 people had gathered to witness the wedding. Jacob stood at the makeshift altar looking nervous and handsome in a new suit, his hair slicked back and his eyes searching the crowd for her. When Martha appeared, walking alone since she had no father to give her away, she saw the exact moment Jacob spotted her. His whole face transformed, lighting up with such joy and love that Martha felt tears prick her eyes. She walked toward him with her head high, and when she reached his side, he took her hand and held it like he would never let go. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, and Martha smiled. Reverend Stone performed a simple ceremony, talking about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage. Martha barely heard the words. She was too focused on Jacob, on the way he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When it came time to exchange vows, they spoke the traditional words, but Martha could see Jacob meant every syllable. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Stone said finally. "Jacob, you may kiss your bride." Jacob cupped Martha's face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent, and kissed her softly while their guests cheered and applauded. When they broke apart, both smiling so wide their faces hurt, Martha felt like she might float away with happiness. "Hello, wife," Jacob murmured, and Martha laughed. "Hello, husband," she replied, testing out the word and finding she liked how it felt. The reception was simple but joyful. They ate roasted beef and vegetables, fresh bread, and a cake that one of the town women had baked. Jacob's hired hands broke out fiddles and there was dancing. Jacob sweeping Martha around in a slightly clumsy waltz while everyone clapped and stamped their feet. "I am not very good at this," Jacob admitted as he stepped on her foot for the third time. "Neither am I," Martha said, laughing. "We will learn together." As the sun set fully and the stars came out, the guests began to disperse, offering final congratulations and well wishes. Finally, Martha and Jacob were alone, standing in front of their house, their home, and looking at each other with a mixture of desire and nervousness. "Are you ready to go inside, Mrs. Tate?" Jacob asked softly, offering his hand. Martha took it without hesitation. "I am ready," she said. Jacob swept her up in his arms, carrying her over the threshold while Martha laughed and clung to his neck. He set her down gently once they were inside, and for a moment they just stood there, suddenly shy with each other. "I have never," Martha started, then stopped, blushing furiously. "Neither have I," Jacob admitted. Not the whole way. "I wanted to wait for marriage, for the right person." He touched her cheek gently. "I am glad I waited for you." Martha felt a wave of love so strong it almost knocked her over. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me how it is supposed to be." Jacob kissed her then, slow and deep, walking her backward toward the bedroom they now shared. The rest of that night was a blur of sensation and discovery, tender and awkward and perfect all at once. Jacob was patient and gentle, and when Martha woke the next morning wrapped in his arms, she felt like a completely different person. She felt whole. The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and joy. They fell into a rhythm of working the ranch together during the day and falling into bed exhausted but happy at night. The cattle thrived, the new well proved reliable, and slowly but surely they began to make a profit. Martha discovered she was good at the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and negotiating fair prices when they sold beef in town. Jacob handled the physical labor and animal husbandry, and together they made a formidable team. The townspeople stopped gossiping and started respecting them as a legitimate operation. In December, 3 months after their wedding, Martha realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Jacob over dinner, her heart in her throat. Jacob's fork clattered to his plate. "Truly?" he asked, his voice strangled. "I think so," Martha said. "It is early yet, but I am usually very regular, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." Jacob let out a shout of pure joy and swept her into his arms, peppering her face with kisses. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Martha, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Martha asked, even though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jacob said. He placed a hand gently over her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I love you already, and I cannot wait to meet you." Martha cried, hormones and happiness combining into an overwhelming wave of emotion. "I am scared," she admitted. "What if I am not a good mother?" "You are going to be amazing," Jacob said firmly. "Look at how you care for the animals, for me, for everyone around you. This baby is going to be so loved, Martha. So incredibly loved." The pregnancy was not easy. Martha was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep anything down. Jacob fretted over her constantly, trying to tempt her with different foods and insisting she rest, even when there was work to be done. By the time she reached her 5th month and the sickness finally eased, they were both exhausted but relieved. As Martha's belly swelled with their child, Jacob became even more protective and attentive. He insisted on doing all the heavy lifting, would not let her ride Daisy anymore, and checked on her constantly throughout the day. It was sweet, but also sometimes smothering. "Jacob, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Martha said one afternoon when he literally carried her to a chair instead of letting her walk the 20 feet herself. "I know," Jacob said, looking abashed. I cannot help it, Martha. You are carrying our baby. What if something happens? What if I am not careful enough and you get hurt? Martha softened, seeing the real fear in his eyes. Nothing is going to happen, she said gently. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong and healthy, and Dr. Morrison says everything is progressing perfectly. You have to trust that. I do trust it, Jacob said, but I also love you more than life itself, and the thought of losing you terrifies me. You are not going to lose me, Martha promised, pulling him down for a kiss. I am not going anywhere. We are going to have this baby, and then we are going to raise him or her together, and we are going to grow old on this ranch watching our grandchildren play. That is the future, Jacob. Hold on to that. Jacob held her close, his face buried in her hair. I love you so much, he whispered. I love you too, Martha replied. Now please let me walk to the chicken coop myself. I need the exercise. Jacob laughed but let her go, watching anxiously from the porch as she made her way across the yard. Martha shook her head fondly. He was impossible, but he was hers. In early July, when the heat was so oppressive that even the lizards sought shade, Martha's labor began. It started slowly, just irregular cramps she tried to ignore. By evening, the pains were coming regularly, and Jacob sent one of the ranch hands racing to town to fetch Dr. Morrison and Helen, who had agreed to assist with the birth. The labor lasted 14 hours, long and difficult and painful. Jacob stayed by Martha's side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even as she screamed and cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. When their son finally emerged, red-faced and wailing, Jacob cried harder than Martha had ever seen. He is perfect, Dr. Morrison said, placing the cleaned and wrapped baby in Martha's arms. Healthy lungs, all his fingers and toes. Congratulations, you two. Martha stared down at her son, overwhelmed by the surge of love she felt. He was tiny and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. Hello, little one, she whispered. I am your mama. Jacob leaned over, touching the baby's soft cheek with one finger. He is incredible, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Martha. Thank you for him, for this, for everything. They named him James after Jacob's father, with the middle name Thomas after the miller who had helped them find each other. Little James Tate was, in his parents' completely unbiased opinion, the finest baby ever born. He had his father's green-gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the start, he had a strong will and loud opinions about everything. The first year of James's life was exhausting but wonderful. Martha learned to function on minimal sleep, and Jacob proved to be a devoted and hands-on father, changing diapers and walking the floor with their son in the middle of the night without complaint. The ranch continued to prosper, and they hired an additional hand to help with the work so Martha could focus on the baby. By James's first birthday, Martha knew she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their second son, Henry, arrived in the spring of 1887. He was a calmer baby than his brother, content to watch the world with solemn eyes while James charged through life like a tiny tornado. 2 boys, Jacob said one evening, watching his son sleep. James was 2.5 now, Henry just 6 months. We make good-looking children. We do, Martha agreed, leaning into his side. They were sitting on the porch in the cooling evening air, the desert painted purple and gold by the setting sun. Are you happy, Jacob? Truly happy? Jacob pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Happier than I ever dreamed possible. This life, this ranch, you, our boys, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You are everything I never knew I wanted. Martha smiled, feeling contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. It was hard to believe that just 3 years ago she had been alone and struggling, accepting charity and wondering if she would ever have more than just survival. Now she had a husband who loved her, 2 healthy sons, and a thriving ranch. She had everything. "I keep thinking about that day at the mill," Martha said softly. "If you had not been there, if you had not decided to help me, where would I be now?" "Probably in the same place," Jacob said honestly. "You are a survivor, Martha. You would have found a way." "I am just grateful I got to be part of your solution instead of you having to do it all alone." "The miller ground my grain for free," Martha mused, "and a cowboy paid him double and asked for my hand. It sounds like a fairy tale." "It is our fairy tale," Jacob said, "and it is not over yet. We are still writing it, every day." The years passed in a blur of work and joy. Martha and Jacob added to their family with a daughter, Sarah, born in 1889 when Martha was 28. Sarah had her mother's gentle nature but her father's determination, and she quickly became the apple of Jacob's eye. Their 4th and final child, another son they named David, arrived in 1891, completing their family. The ranch grew and prospered. They expanded their herd, bought more land, and eventually built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family. Jacob's prediction that they would grow old together watching their grandchildren play seemed more and more likely to come true. Thomas Wright passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1893, and Martha cried at his funeral, remembering the kindness of the old miller who had kept her fed when she had nothing. His son took over the mill, and Martha made sure to tell him the story of how his father's charity had changed her life. "Your father was a good man," she told him. "He helped me when I needed it most, and he never made me feel small for needing help. That is a rare quality." The town of Calico itself began to decline as the silver mines played out, but the Tate ranch remained successful. Other ranchers sought Jacob's advice, and Martha became known for her business acumen and fair dealing. Together, they were pillars of the community, respected and admired. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Martha back to the spot where he had first proposed, that low stone wall at the edge of town. Their children were staying with Helen for the night, giving them a rare evening alone. "You remember what I said here?" Jacob asked, holding Martha's hand as they watched the sun set. "Every word," Martha said. "You told me you were falling in love with me, that you wanted to marry me and build a life together." "I meant every word then, and I mean it even more now," Jacob said. He pulled her into his arms, and Martha went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to his steady heartbeat. "You have given me everything, Martha. A home, a family, a purpose. I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I will love you even more 10 years from now." "We have been lucky," Martha said softly, "so very lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Jacob disagreed. "We worked for this. We built it together, and we are going to keep building it for as long as we have." They stood there as the stars came out, holding each other and marveling at the life they had created. It had not always been easy. There had been droughts and sick cattle, money troubles and sleepless nights with sick children. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. 20 years after that fateful day at the mill, Martha stood on the porch of their ranch house, now a substantial and comfortable home, and watched her grandchildren play in the yard. James, at 22, had married a sweet girl from Barstow and already had 2 children of his own. Henry was courting a rancher's daughter and talking about marriage. Sarah, at 13, was growing into a beautiful young woman with her mother's practical nature and her father's big heart. David, at 11, was all boy, covered in dirt and full of mischief. Jacob came up behind Martha, sliding his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. At 47, he had some gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, but to Martha, He was as handsome as the day they met. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we have come," Martha said, leaning back into his embrace. "How different life is now compared to what it was." "Better?" Jacob asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "So much better," Martha confirmed. "Jacob, do you ever regret it? Coming to Calico, tying yourself to me in this harsh land?" "Not for a single second," Jacob said firmly. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life stems from that choice. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, all of it exists because I was lucky enough to be at that mill the day you were there, because I was smart enough to see what a treasure you were and brave enough to take a chance." "I was the lucky one," Martha argued. "You saved me, Jacob." "We saved each other," Jacob corrected. He turned her in his arms so he could look at her properly. "You were drowning in debt and pride, and I was drowning in loneliness and aimlessness. We found each other and built something neither of us could have built alone. That is not luck, Martha. That is love." Martha kissed him, pouring 44 years of love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, both smiling, she saw their children and grandchildren watching them with expressions ranging from amusement to affection. "You two are disgustingly sweet," James called out, but he was grinning. "You should be so lucky to have what your parents have," Jacob called back, making everyone laugh. As the sun set over the Mojave Desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Martha looked at the life she and Jacob had built and felt nothing but gratitude. The miller had ground her grain for free, a kindness she had not known how to repay. A cowboy had paid him double and asked for her hand, changing the course of both their lives forever. It was not a fairy tale. It was better. It was real, built on hard work and genuine love, on mutual respect and partnership. It was a life of purpose and meaning, of children and grandchildren, of laughter and tears and everything in between. "I love you, Jacob Tate," Martha said, holding tight to the man who had become her everything. "I love you too, Martha Tate," Jacob replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." And as their family gathered around them, 3 generations sharing a meal and making memories, Martha knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but absolutely, completely worth it. They had started with nothing but hope and a chance encounter at a mill. They had built an empire of love, and it would endure long after they were gone, passed down through their children and their children's children, a legacy of what 2 people could create when they chose to face life together. The story that had begun with charity and ended in partnership was now legend in Calico. Young couples in town still pointed to the Tate Ranch as an example of what was possible with hard work and genuine love. Thomas Wright's act of kindness and Jacob Tate's generous gesture had created ripples that spread far beyond that single transaction at the mill. Years later, when Martha and Jacob were both in their 70s, they would sit on that same porch and tell their grandchildren the story of how they met. The children never tired of hearing it, the tale of the struggling woman and the kind cowboy who saw her worth when she could barely see it herself. "Your grandmother was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Jacob would say, his voice a bit rougher with age but still full of warmth. "But more than that, she was strong, still is the strongest person I know. Your grandfather was my miracle," Martha would add, squeezing his weathered hand. "He appeared exactly when I needed him most and taught me that accepting help is not weakness. That love is not something you have to earn, but something freely given between 2 people who choose each other." The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, with Henry helping to expand into horse breeding. Sarah married a lawyer from San Francisco but returned to Calico often, unable to stay away from her desert home for long. David became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend college, and brought his skills back to serve the ranching community. Martha and Jacob lived long, full lives, dying within months of each other in 1925, both in their 80s. Their funerals were attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched over the decades. The ranch passed to their children, then their grandchildren, and on down through the generations, each one honoring the legacy of hard work, integrity, and love that Martha and Jacob had established. The mill that had brought them together was eventually torn down as Calico faded from a bustling mining town to a ghost town, and eventually to a historical site. But the Tate Ranch endured, a testament to what could be built when two people refused to give up on each other or on their dreams. In the years before they died, Martha and Jacob would often take evening walks around the property, moving slower than they used to but still together, still side by side. They would talk about their children and grandchildren, about the changes they had seen in the world, about the life they had lived. "If you could do it all again," Martha asked Jacob one evening, "would you change anything?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he smiled, that same smile that had first captured Martha's heart so many decades ago. "Not a single thing," he said. "Well, maybe I would have kissed you sooner, but everything else, perfect exactly as it was, even the hard parts," Martha pressed. "The drought of '92. When Sarah was so sick we thought we would lose her. When the cattle market crashed, even those," Jacob confirmed, "because we went through them together. And coming out the other side made the good times even sweeter. Besides, without the struggles, how would we have learned what we were really made of?" Martha nodded, understanding. Their love had been forged in adversity and strengthened by time. It was not the stuff of romantic novels, where everything was easy and passion solved all problems. It was better than that. It was real and lasting and deep, built on thousands of small choices to keep loving even when it was hard. On the day Jacob died, Martha held his hand and told him all the things she had been telling him for decades. That he was a good man. That he had been the best husband and father anyone could ask for. That their life together had been her greatest joy. Jacob smiled and told her he would wait for her, wherever he was going, and that she should take her time but not too much time because he would miss her. When Martha followed him 4 months later, her last words were his name, spoken with all the love she had carried for him for more than 40 years of marriage. Their children, gathered around her bed, took comfort in knowing she was going to him, that whatever came next, their parents would face it together as they had faced everything else. The marker in the Calico cemetery read, "Jacob and Martha Tate, beloved parents and grandparents." They built a life on love and left a legacy of faith. Below that, added by their children, was a simple inscription, "The Cowboy and his Bride," but their true legacy was not in stone. It lived in their descendants who still worked the ranch, in the stories told and retold about their love and partnership, in the values they had passed down through the generations. It lived in the community they had helped build and the lives they had touched. The story of how the miller ground her grain for free, and a cowboy paid him double and asked for her hand became part of Calico's history, told to tourists who visited the ghost town and to students learning about life in the Old West. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and that two people working together could build something that would endure long after they were gone. Martha and Jacob's love story was not unusual in the grand sweep of history. Countless couples have found each other against odds, have built lives together, have loved and lost and triumphed. But to them, and to their children and grandchildren, it was everything. It was the foundation upon which generations were built, the example they all strive to follow. And perhaps that is what true love really is. Not the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those have their place, but the daily choice to show up, to work hard, to be patient, to forgive and be forgiven, to build something lasting together one day at a time, through good weather and bad, through plenty and want, through joy and sorrow. Jacob had seen Martha struggling and chosen to help. Martha had chosen to accept that help and take a chance on love. Together, they had chosen each other every day for more than 40 years. And in doing so, they created something beautiful and enduring, a love story for the ages that began with compassion and grew into something neither of them could have imagined that day at the mill. Their story proved that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, that a chance meeting can change everything. That love is not about finding a perfect person, but about choosing to build a perfect life with an imperfect person who is perfect for you. In the end, the miller's kindness had not just kept Martha alive through hard times. It had led her directly to the man who would become her everything. Jacob's generosity in paying double and asking for her hand had not just been about pride or romance. It had been the first step in a journey that would span decades and touch countless lives. They had started with nothing but hope in each other. They had ended with everything that truly mattered, a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure. It was more than either of them had dared to dream on that hot afternoon in Calico, when their eyes first met across a dusty mill yard. It was, simply and completely, enough.